Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where it is that you're joining us. It is my pleasure and privilege to be in a conversation with my dear old friend and esteemed colleague, Professor Shahla Haeri, who is a remarkable scholar and remarkable advocate for Iranian women. And this is fortunately not the first time that we have had the good fortune of hosting her at Stanford. The occasion for this conversation is, as Ms. Farhad indicated, the continuing discussion about women's movement in Iran. Professor Haeri's latest work does not cover Iran specifically, but because of her long interest and writing on Iran, invariably that comes up. Her book before was specifically on a phenomena that is almost unique to Iran, the issue of temporary marriages. So as a first question, I want to, first of all, congratulate her for their book, but also ask how she went from writing about Iran. I know her work is unique in its cross-cultural aspect. How did she went from Iran and the issue of temporary marriage, the controversial issue of temporary marriage, to writing about the unforgettable queens of Islam.
Salam. Thank you very much, Professor Milani, and I'd like to thank your Ms. Farhad and Franco for helping me all along to get into this stage. Well, you know, I think I did my first book, Law of Desire, when I was a graduate student at UCLA, and as a young graduate student, I was looking for something unique, something ethnographically interesting, and nobody had ever done any work on an institution of temporary marriage. And when I started thinking about it, it was actually before Revolution of 1979. So it was something that I thought I could just do, and go back to Iran and interview women who had actually done that, and to find out why was it that they did that, and what were their justifications for this form of marriage in a country where we do have, men have the permission to have several wives. So what was the justification? So I was both interested in law and how law is translated into practice. Who are the lawmakers? Who are the practitioners of this form of marriage? But what I also found out is that it's actually, even though in this form it's unique to Iran, in a sense, it is something really Islamic, almost all over the Muslim world. One form or another of this form of marriage is practiced, although it may not be necessarily called temporary marriage or sighe as Iranian call it in the Iranian vernacular is known as sighe, or mut'e, which is its technical term. So in a way, it is also across cultures in the Islamic world, because they have to deal with this issue of how to allow for people to practice certain, to have relationship outside of the one that is approved by the state, right? So not everybody can do that. And of course, marriage moves along a certain perspective, but not everybody can do it. So by itself, it's really not a problem, because people can decide whether they want to be married temporarily or permanently. The problem is in the extreme unequal status, responsibilities, duties, privileges of men and women. Men can have 4 wives simultaneously and as many temporary wives as they like. In the old days, they could have as many concubines as they want. They could have slave women. So this is a tremendous difference between the status or what women can expect to have as a citizens, which often they are not considered a full citizen. They move something between citizen and subject, and what men can have. So what was interesting for me to not only retrieve the history of this tradition in the Muslim world, in Islamic history, but find out how it gets to practice in Iran. And then later on, I discovered that it is actually done in almost all over the Muslim world. So would you like me to then, and that,
Absolutely.
okay. So what it is, what was interesting for me after I finished that book, which was well received, and um, really it initiated a lot more studies that used that book as the foundation for later studies. But look, we live in this country. I live in America. I teach. And I'm constantly in touch with the students, with the scholars, with friends, both Americans or from other cultures or Iranians. We do see the kinds of narrative that is dominant in this country as far as women are concerned. Even when I did that narrative is something, of Muslim women, which has come to be known as a colonial narrative, which assumes that Muslim women are this huge, undifferentiated category, regardless of their ethnicities, nationalities, class, education, profession, what have you. So as I talked about my first book, I actually tried to bring out women's agencies, even though women are disadvantaged, hugely. In Iran, nonetheless, they're not without options. And those that are a bit smarter, they try to use their options. But then again, coming back to this narrative, this colonial narrative about women, it occurred to me in the 1990s that it seemed as if I, as an educated Muslim woman, were totally invisible to the educated, even the educated, let alone the general public, to the scholarly community, to my students. So I thought that I need to bring out other dimensions of Muslim women's lives. And in that sense, it didn't really matter whether you were Iranians or Pakistanis or from other, or Egyptians, other parts of the Muslim world. So my idea was to make visible, shall we use that expression, the lives and activities of women, educated, professional, middle class, upper middle class Muslim women. And up until then, pretty much like my book on temporary marriage, nobody really had paid much attention to educated professional Muslim women. Most of the studies were obsessed with the idea of veiling. Veiling is important. We have to understand it in context. We have to understand its history. We have to understand how women have historically engaged with it. But it's also important to understand there are other categories of Muslim women all over the Muslim world. As I mentioned, even in Iran, even these women, those who practice temporary marriage, who are from underprivileged classes for the most part, they engage with the structures of power. They wanted to have a meaningful relationship. So I wanted to, for my second book, to again have some comparative basis for the studies we do. And also my interlocutors are Americans here, my students, my colleagues, people who read these books. So that took me to Pakistan. And I have to tell you, even as a Muslim educated woman, the first time I went there, I was surprised at my own stereotypes that were still pretty much colored by what I had heard in this country, even though I was trying to challenge those and engage with those. So I went to Pakistan. I was quite impressed by the category of professional, educated, middle class, upper middle class women, how these women engage with their own communities, how they are trying to be of some use of some help to their own communities, to their families, to their societies, to their communities. So that book was, again, trying to give a comparative perspective. Because particularly, I have to say, when we come to Iranians, I realize that we really are so focused on our own culture. And obviously, we have such a tremendous history. We have a civilization of which we can be rightly proud of. But at the same time, I think we need to get out of our own cultures, to look at other people, to look at other examples in the Muslim world, to truly understand the history of Islamic development, not just Iran, which of course, as I said, has a very proud history, but also the other Muslim Islamic country. Which brings me to my last book. And actually that book was I was initially inspired by Iranian women. who at the turn of the 21st century nominated themselves, some women nominated themselves for the office of the president in a country like Iran, in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Here I was in America waiting to, see some articles in New York Times about that, Washington Post, not a peep. Nobody talked about that. Not even in Iran, and except for Majaleh Zanan, and others who talked a little bit about that. So I just wanted to know, who are these women? What do they think about themselves? What do they think about their societies? What kind of discourse do they use? How aware are they of the society in which they live, the constitution of the country in which they were challenging, So that created the impetus for me to look at the whole idea of leadership of women, which then brought me to the idea of the significance of women in general, Muslim women in particular, and of course, when we come to Iranian women, to have a seat at the political table, because it is there when they can influence the change. They can suggest different ways of understanding gender relationship. They can suggest and be influential in creating a law that is more equitable, that is more friendly, understanding, egalitarian of the hugely unequal or injustices that women have felt throughout the Islamic history. So that's the trajectory of my work.
Let me make one comment. I'm very surprised that you identify yourself as a Muslim woman. I've always thought of you as Haeri. If I thought, furthermore, I would have thought of an eminent Iranian scholar who's working in America. The fact that you identify yourself as a Muslim woman for me is very indicative of where you're trying to stay in this whole narrative, which is, fascinating to look at. And the second comment is when you talk about the candidates for presidency in Iran as a novelty, I'm sure you know better than I do, Iran is a culture that has had queens, kings.
Sure.
And in the modern history, 150 years ago, we had Qurratul Ain, we had a minister who's, I'm sure your friend, we had her on our program, Afkhami. Farrokh Parsa was a minister. So the fact that the Islamic Republic for 20, 30 years blocked every access of women to political power and then blocked them from accessing a presidency doesn't give them a privileged position as Muslim women seeking authority. I would have thought you would talk about this as how, in spite of the effort of this Islamic State to block every political effort by women, some women are still trying, even within this limited concept that says Rejal can run, and Rejal historically has meant men. Occasionally, Khanum Talaqani said, who said Rejal is men?
Absolutely.
So, how would you, how does one reconcile these different identities and try to, stay in a place that you don't fall into, as you call, the colonial discourse, but you don't also fall into this other narrative that tries to legitimize Islam?
Muslim women, well, I'll come back and tell you why I considered myself a Muslim, and I don't make any apologies about that, because I think Muslim women have historically shown how much they have been involved in their communities, in the societies, and how much they have tried to change the narratives of, victimized Muslim women, which it is, the misogyny that is gone to women back in Iran or any other Arab Muslim communities. It's not a secret. We see it all the time. We feel it. No, the reason I say Muslim women, Islam provides a multiplicity of identities that you can actually, in a way, you can pick and choose. At the turn of the century, Islam, you have all these magnificent women, Khadija, Aisha, Zainab, Fatima. But in fact, in my book on Queen of Unforgettable Queens of Islam, I start with the significance of leadership of Empress Turandot in Iran for the later development of misogyny that has now been perpetrated on women in the Muslim world and specifically in Iran. So in fact, I have made a point of talking about her and having not exactly a chapter, because it was not about Iranian kings and queens, but she has a place of honor there. Absolutely, that is very important, and no doubt we should not forget that. Furthermore, in my book, I talk about that I'm talking about women at the forefront of the position of power, not behind the scene. Women behind the scene have always had power, and I talk about that in my book. Not only they have had power, they have had power to change regimes, to influence men of power. And to the point that when you read Nizam al-Mulk, talking about, at the time of Malak Shah, he is just so upset about women having so much power in the court of the king. And in fact, he is all the smart, all the intelligence that this man has, he makes the ultimate mistake by advising the king to choose another son of his, or a son not of his favorite wife, but of someone else. Guess what happened? She manages for the king to kick him out and eventually have him killed. So these women have always had powers, and someone like Qurratul Ain is superb. And my beloved friend has written much about her, and every time I use her example, of course, I use Farzaneh Milani's work. So these are facts of life, and I have tried to weave those into my book, because these women who get to the position of power don't come out of vacuum. There is a huge amount of number of women behind it. There is a layer of exercising power and prestige. But my point in that book was specifically women who have worn the crown, shall we say, not those who have functioned behind the throne. In fact, talking about Iran, I have devoted in a few pages not only to Turandot, our famous emperor, which, let me just say that she was the only one among all the men who confronted the Arab invasion. She was the one who managed to win the only battle that has come to be known as the Battle of Bridge. She tried to forgive many of the people's taxes. She tried to create a more equitable society rather than this hugely class differentiated society. Unfortunately, she was killed by one of her leaders. So that's one. But another example I use of Iran, which is superb, it's really amazing, is the second daughter of Shah Tahmasp of Safavid, Pari Khan Khanum, whose name, interestingly, is called Pari Khan Khanum, has both the Khan and the Khanum in it. And again, she was extraordinary. She was eventually killed by her brother's wife, or instigated by her brother, before she actually became, before she turned 30. So these women have always had power. And we have them in really remarkable numbers. And we should be really proud of them. But the reason I said this video documentary that I made in the turn of the century is that here we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran, which, as you rightly said, had done its best to vanquish women and stifle the voices, right? But here, then again, we see that women have not remained silent. And the categories of women, or the number, there are only 6 women there who I was able to find and interview. But the most important challenge they level against the regime is precisely on that Article 115, which has to do with the qualities of who can or cannot be the president of a country like Iran. And the word there is rijal. So Mrs. Talagani, as you mentioned rightly, in 1996, and then later on this other woman said, who said Rijal should be understood as men? We are Persians. We are Iranians. We do not have these propositions. Rijal in Iran can mean, has meant, those political elite, and women are a member of the political elite. And one of the women I interviewed is really just very distinguished lady, tightly veiled, and she was the discipline, what do you call that, nazem, you know, like a principal of a high school. She was so astute in her talking about why it is important for women to become leaders, even of a country like the Republic of Iran. First of all, she used as the person who legitimated her leadership was the Queen of Sheba from the revelations that Prophet Muhammad received. So she said, here we have this example of the Queen of Sheba. So why can't I become the president of a country like Iran? But she was astutely aware of the tenor of the discourse of the Islamic Republic. Everything she said, she used religious and either revelations or traditions, either the ayahs from the Quran or hadith of Prophet Muhammad. She knew what she was doing, you know, and she said, she clearly talked, she says, I disagree with this veil that I have, you know, on my hair. She disagreed with the forced veiling, even though she was veiled. Now, the importance of that film was not just for Iranians, because many disagreed with that and objected to it, because, as you said, because of the dynamics, the political dynamics in the country. But here, I also teach young students here, and I engage with my colleagues here. Students and my colleagues could see the fact that, first of all, these women have different variations of hijab, different variations of a scarf. So they understood that there are differences among them. They understood that this is forced on some people. But they also understood that just because these women wear a scarf, they don't lose their brain. They are trying to engage the most sacrosanct political structure in the country and engage with that. So these are all very interconnected. With the way that I try to write, because I'm not just writing for Iranians. I've written some Persian, articles, but I'm writing for a broader community and Muslim and also Americans here in this country.
As a confirmation of the influence that these women had, I think just last week, the representative or the spokesperson for the Guardian Council said that they have reconsidered the word Rajal, and now women are considered Rajal, and they might have a candidate this coming election. I mean, it's again part of the political dynamics. They're in a crisis. They know women are angry, and they think a woman might save the regime. But nevertheless, it's a very major shift that has occurred.
If I may say, add something there, in one of the women I interviewed in that video is Shahla Shirkat, who's a very notable, very interesting woman who has been publishing a magazine now. It's called Zanan Emruz. She makes a very interesting point there, which I wasn't initially aware of, but then, of course, she brought it to my attention. She says that at the time of the Islamic Republic, when the constitution was being written, and Ayatollah Beheshti was there was actually a debate as to whether or not that word should be Rajal or should be men. And the person who suggested that no, it should be Rajal was in fact Ayatollah Beheshti, who realized these dead ends in the constitution. So he wanted to let a way out of such dilemmas. So in a way, though, that whole idea was there, and these guys, saving face and saying, okay, now women can apply for that. But every time they can get disqualified by the Guardian Council. Yes, they can go and they can buy some, positive points for themselves, but nonetheless, they can go on and disqualify women.
I'll ask one more question. I can see that there are many people submitting questions that we're going to allow people to ask you questions. So one last question that I want to ask. As I indicated earlier, you're one of the few scholars who has studied these Islamic women's movement in a comparative context. What would you say are the unique characteristics, or are there any unique characteristics to the Iranian women's movement, contemporary Iranian women's movement, as compared to these other countries that you have studied?
You know, that's a question that I didn't quite consider in such a way that you have articulated. One of the things that I can just quickly think about and talk about is self-confidence that many Iranian women have, which is really very interesting. One of the things, that, again, that I talk about, the video that I made, that, you know, some people challenged, that particularly men, in fact, challenged me more than women did, was the self-confidence these women showed. You know, I mean, they come from different backgrounds that you do not quite see among, well, at least not in my studies. You know, I haven't seen, although I have seen Pakistani women being very, very articulate, very engaged, very involved in their communities. But still, there is something unique about Iranian women, it seems to me, and that is, as I said, is that sense of, why can't I? Why can't I be the leader of a country like Iran? We've had that because we have the models. We have the models, we have the examples in our history. And our history is so long, or the cultural richness that we have creates some kind of character, some kind of identity. You know, and again, I'm just talking quickly without really giving it much thought. But you are right. I have noticed that Iranian women, on the whole, and it doesn't matter from what class they're, and that's what's interesting, because Pakistani women that I interviewed are from basically upper middle class background. But Iranian women, I have seen, I go to Iran frequently. I've talked to so many people, even from very impoverished background, but these women have a sense about themselves, have an idea about their identity. And that identity is actually Iranian identity, which it is based, it's rested on this long history, this layered and long history of, you know, tradition, culture, politics. It's really something interesting that we can talk about that later on. But in my next project, I'll think more about that now that you brought that to my attention.
I mean, it is really remarkable how important the role of women have been in the last 40 years.
Yes, and if I may just add one last thing, I would like again to make a reference to my friend Farzaneh Milani, who talks about the third revolution in Iran. The first being the constitutional revolution, second being the revolution of '79. And then this revolution is a lot more amorphous, but it is there. It is continuing, and we are beginning to see manifestations of it in all these stratas and classes of Iranian society.
Yeah, I think some people might not have read or heard Farzaneh's speech. Farzaneh, the third revolution is the rise
of women's revolution,
the entrance of women in the public domain.
Right.
I think, you know, the prominence of characters like Nasrin Sotoudeh in the democratic struggles of the people of Iran, and many, many other. I mean, if you look at the icons of the struggle, how many of them are women right now? It's just remarkable.
A majority of them are women. And it is interesting just to see that how many voices of these women are, I mean, what a huge effort is made to stifle these voices, but they are continuing. And,
before I forget, I had one other question. Many years ago, I had read a book by Mernisi, The Forgotten Queens of Islam. Can you talk a little bit about how your book differs from that, whether it was influenced by it in any way?
To begin with, it's very different. But yes, of course, the title, I mean, she was a pioneer, and she started talking about these amazing women in history of Islam. Again, she tried to do some comparative work and bringing out all these women. At the time, it was great, still is. But what I sort of differed from her was that she thought that they are forgotten by history. But I was trying to say, no, they were not, because not only, well, maybe by history, male history, yes, because our history books are written by men, primarily by men, for men, and, you know. But then I was going to say that there is another arena, another domain. Women have not been forgotten. This is the public domain. This is the oral history of these women that have remained. And also I was trying to say how pragmatically patriarchy has tried to sort of mold itself to get to accommodate some of these women themselves. So it's not totally that they have been forgotten by history. In fact, because if they had been completely forgotten, we wouldn't be hearing about them over and over again. So I was inspired by her title, The Forgotten, but I was going to say they are unforgettable because they are in the history of these countries. And if you go to these countries, if you talk to people, you know, almost the entire public knows something about them. So it's not that they are being forgotten. But no doubt her work is pioneer.
Fantastic. I know we have questions, so I don't want to monopolize. I can ask you many, many, many other questions that I have. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
my questions.
It was a great conversation.
Ms. Roma Parhad is going to ask some of the questions that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haeri. A few questions coming through from our viewers. One viewer asks, what do you think are the biggest obstacles to Muslim women being portrayed in the media for their accomplishments? What do we need to do as a society to increase representation of Muslim women in said media, such as those who you wrote about in your book?
Well, again, that's a very good question. And I started by saying that Muslim women, I am talking about women in general from the Muslim world, and I don't want to imply as if there is a big category of Muslim women. Nonetheless, women from the Muslim world in all these societies seem to be in a between rock and a hard place, because many of their own home countries provide, or the way that they treat their women give the impression, or there's not the impression, they're being quite misogynistic. Women don't have much right in terms of the person they want to, at the times of divorce, they may now have a chance to marry to the person they want, but as soon as they marry, they lose many of their rights and privileges. They cannot leave the country without their husband's permission. The way they have been treated by their own political and religious organizations back in their home countries provide enough fodder for the way that the Western media then can refer to those and say, look, this is how you are being treated. What the West does, pretty much what these Islamic countries do, is try to unify, is try to remove the multiplicity, the diversity, the complexity of the categories of women, or the kinds of women who are involved in their communities, by just pointing out to the women, how women are being treated in that part of the world. Just imagine, like in Afghanistan, women, and in Iran too, in Turkey, in many Muslim countries, women are being stoned to death. Even if they were to claim or to have been raped. If women, again, that's what I mean by being between a rock and a hard place. If women were to say they were raped, then that would be taken to mean that they have confessed to having illegal, relationship with men, and then that would be a justification for their stoning. Whereas if you look at even at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, of course, there are the Quranic revelations which goes against such behavior, but nonetheless, men who have been, the scholars who have interpreted these particular revelations have twisted the idea, the treatment, the very equitable, wise treatment Prophet Muhammad had of women who have been accused, meaning particularly his own wife. But in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, we hear that women are being stoned to death. which is really a horrible thing to do. So the West, in the Western media, you see that these images of women are taken and then projected as if this is the only way that women are being treated, or as if the only way that women are behaving in those countries. So the way we can do it is just to talk to people. Of course, we don't have access to media. Media is very powerful in this nation, in this country, But I talk to my students. I show them the slides. I, constantly try to challenge such ideas by bringing specific actions of women from all over the Muslim world. I show a video documentary called Feminism and Shahla, which shows, how women have been challenging the political system, religious system, economic system in their own countries, and how they try to provide a more reasonable pictures of women. So I think we just have to constantly bring out the inconsistencies, not to be so defensive about what's happening in our part of the world, because what's happening in our part of the world is really not defensible, but also challenge what's happening in this part of the world.
Thank you. Another viewer asks, going back to the temporary marriage question, what occurs to children born into these marriages? What if the father denies the child? Are they able to attain a passport, for instance, or driver's license? Referring to the new documentary Love Child, which follows a complicated love match and their child and its implications, was part of the inspiration behind this question.
Well, okay, let's go one by one. To begin with, legally, this form of marriage, a woman's child, is considered legal. But that's assuming that she cares to register the marriage, right? If the marriage is not registered, then and the father denies that, then she has no recourse. Of course, now we have the DNA, she can have the DNA. But in the old days, if a father, in fact, I have a case like that in my book. If a man denies paternity, she has no recourse, unless she has had some people witnessing the act of, the short contract of temporary marriage between the couple. Otherwise, she could actually be punished for having performed adultery. So it's important for the woman to realize what they're getting into, right? So register that. So legally, we're told that children of temporary marriage are recognized. They inherit equitably the same amount as the children born of regular marriages. Again, these are all with the recognition of the law, because women have to have the presence of mind and intention to register the marriage, and then have other people witness that. So witnesses are very, very important. So legally, yes, women, a child is recognized, and if it is recognized, therefore the child can have passports, shtanasname, the ID cards, and everything else that goes with that. But that in reality doesn't quite happen like that. But this is the law that I was just mentioning.
Thank you. Another viewer says, what do you think is the reason behind the very low participation of Iranian women in the economy, even compared to other Muslim countries, in spite of the closure of the educational gap since at least 2 decades ago?
Well, economy is not exactly my area of expertise, but let me just make 2 points. One is that as soon as, in fact, Islamic Republic consolidated its power and many women were kicked out of their positions, then they turned into the informal economy. In fact, I've talked to so many people who try to convert their little rooms into some kind of office for them to perform some kind of economic activities, whether it was selling vegetables or quilt making or any other objects. So the informal economy, in fact, flourished. So I don't know about the official, the formal economy. Again, I don't know the exact number of the involvement of women in other Islamic countries. But the problem is that right now, Iran has been facing so much, problem that the economy is in such shambles that almost nobody really, except for a small group of people. Nobody really does have much job. But again, this is not really the area that I know of. But what I do want to emphasize is how women tried to maintain their families by doing this informal economic and productive activities. And there's a lot of them. There are a lot of them.
Thank you. Another viewer asks, how much do you think the Me Too movement, the photos of women without scarves, the action of feminist activists in Iran is reaching or influencing the great majority of women, rural, lower class, middle women, etc.?
Again, I have not really specifically pursued that particular movement. To begin with, Iranian women are from wherever, I mean, the villages, the small towns, the big towns, are becoming aware of how the political elite or people in power have used their power to manipulate sexually or otherwise a lot of young people. You know, there's a very famous case of Rehane Jabari, who was, you know, attacked by her boss. I mean, the man who wanted to hire her, and then she killed him, and then eventually she was killed. So these events happen quite frequently. What is good is that more and more people are becoming aware. I mean, publicity is important. Once women have their voices heard in the public domain, then it is difficult to shut them down. You know, as one of the women I interviewed several years ago in Iran told me, she said, look, and she was again, you know, from, you know, a member of the Mr. Khatami's cabinet. She said, but look, the windows have been opened up. Women are out in the streets. You cannot push them back in the confinements of their homes. So Me Too movement or any movement like that create a certain awareness, and women have become aware, have awakened to what is happening, and whenever they get a chance, they try to make their voices heard. And what is more important is the collective agency of these women that is becoming more and more powerful. That's what's creating the backlash on the part of the states in Iran or anywhere else. So I am sure that more and more women are becoming aware of these situations. But the case of Romina in the village in northern Iran several months ago really, again, awakened a lot of people. And it just can't happen that a father can just go on and kill his little daughter just because he doesn't like the man she wants to be with. So they have, you know, the state is confronted with these situations, confronted with the idea of women's political leadership, confronted with the idea of women. I mean, the economy of the family needs women participation, needs women to help them. So for the state not to allow women to participate in the economic sector, it's just doesn't make sense. So by the same token, you know, to keep trying to hide these ideas or hush them or just say that these things aren't happening or they're imported from the West, people are just seeing in their daily lives, and they've become more and more aware of it, and they cannot be silenced any longer.
Thank you. But we have a lot of questions that I want to try to get to before we run out of time. So another viewer writes, your scholarship extends beyond the realm of one country. In view of your cross-cultural work, how do you think women have challenged the dynamics of power structures in Iran? What are their successes and their challenges?
Well, Dr. Milani talked about the women being in power, you know, in Iran for a long time, and I agree with that, and I have written about them. But let's just look at after the revolution of 1979 and see what women have done. Women were in the forefront of revolution, right? In fact, one of the women I interviewed in my video documentary, she says, look, in fact, not only one woman, 3 women mentioned that. By all accounts, women and youth made the revolution possible in Iran. So women were in the public domain, women were in the forefront of revolution and fighting for their rights. Many wanted to have a more egalitarian society, a more democratic society, and they fought for it. Well, in no time, they were pushed back because of the changes in the political regime. But once women caught their breath, they came back again and they wanted to be involved in politics. it's just enough for us to look at the sixth parliament. I mean, Khanum Talagani that Dr. Milani talked about, one of the first women who got into the parliament in Iran. But then the most important period in the history of Islamic Republic, as far as women and political participation and awareness is concerned, is the sixth parliament, which I believe it was 1996 through 2000, or right about around that time. The women, I mean, you look at 6 women in that parliament and the kinds of discourse they have, it's just mind-boggling. They are so incredibly aware, powerful, knowledgeable, not only of the discussions and discourse they have within the parliament, and they've forced their colleagues to get engaged in kinds of discussions that has to do with women's rights and responsibilities and participations in the political domain, but they managed to have network of support outside of the parliament among the women lawyers, women journalists, women scholars. So it was a fantastic time for women to really express their views of what was happening in Iran. I happened to be in Iran. I participated in a lot of these activities. I went to the gatherings. It's just incredible. I've written about them. But what happened? What happened after that? And that's where the unequal political privilege and power comes in. After the sixth parliament, the entire women representatives who were in the parliament were disqualified. They could not continue to go on and continue their activities for their constituency or within the country, within the parliament for the country. And the women who came to power after that were those who were supported by particular ideological and political powers, and they did not have much voices. They did not try to, shall we say, step beyond their domain of responsibilities, which was assigned to them. They were consistently prevented from becoming the leaders of one caucus or another in the parliament. So, the situation of women in the parliament declined. So it is really important to see how these women have tried to, Iranian women, I think I lost the major point of the question. But what I am trying to say is that when women get a chance, as soon as they get a chance, they try to come in and be active and be vocal and be visible. But then there is a huge pushback that, so as soon as women have one step forward, they'll push 2 steps backward.
Thank you. Another viewer asks, in the US, we're seeing Muslim women in political positions and as visible leaders of a progressive movement, for example, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. Can you talk about their influence, if any, in the context of Muslim majority countries?
Well, again, this is not the area that I have worked on, but as a Muslim woman, as a woman, as hopefully a progressive woman in this country, I could not notice the presence of Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or other women, not on that level, but in other arenas of activities, scientific, scholarly, political, economic, what have you. There are Muslim women everywhere. So these 2 women, no doubt, are going to be very, very influential, and not just for a Muslim woman, I hope. I hope that they have greater appeals to their constituency, who they happen to be of whatever background, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, and what have you. But we also have to realize that there is tremendous pressure to push these women out of the political arena, and a lot of money is raised to push them out. But they are fighting, and they are very articulate. I have seen Ilhan Omar in the Congress, in some of the caucuses. She is very articulate. She's very interesting. But I hope they keep their agendas in perspective and not to be pushed one way or another by some interest groups this way or that way. So as far as their visibility and their impact on Muslim women in the country or other women, I just don't think that we have to necessarily think just because I'm Muslim, I have to have influence only on Muslim women. The same way that many of my professors happen to be from other faith or other backgrounds, and they had strong influence on me and many other people. So I hope these two women, and many more like them, and I hope to get involved in politics, would have lasting and positive and productive impact on their constituencies initially, and then on the entire country eventually.
Thank you. I want to combine two questions. So one viewer says, many thanks for your pioneering and cross-cultural work on women. I have learned a great deal from your body of work. Would you tell us who is your favorite queen and why? And then another viewer says, why have you not included any Iranian women leaders as one of the unforgettable queens in your book?
You know, it is so hard to say which one is my favorite queen, but I am going to risk and say the Queen of Sheba. Who is really extraordinary. And I have written several papers about her. I mean, her character, we have just a few lines, you know, in the Quran. The story is, you know, part of Surah of Naml, Surah 27, and ayah from 20 to 45. There's a very short number of ayahs, verses about her. But then her impact in the imaginations of the Muslims and Jews and Christians and Ethiopians and others has been international and cross-cultural, and you know, on and on. So she's very special. But of course, other women are of interest to me. I found almost all of them really, if one reads their life stories, and that's what was my interest. The whole idea was, how did these women get to the position of power? How did they overcome all the obstacles to them, that is for women, in order to become the queens? All of them are very charismatic. All of them are very aware of what's going on. And all of them have tremendous public support. They create fear in the parts of the political and religious elites who try to push them out of power and eventually vanquish them. Someone like Benazir Bhutto was basically killed and assassinated. So let me just not choose a particular woman, queen. All of them, I hope they're interest to others. I desperately wanted to have a queen from Iran. And there are several queens. There are, of course, Turandot, which I have written about her in my book, but it was not a Muslim queen. Again, remember, I was trying to challenge some of the assumptions that are prevalent here against Muslim women's and Muslim women's political agency, political participations, their voices, their visibilities, all that. So part of my interlocutors are people from here. So for that matter, I wanted to really talk about these women who've actually come to power. Now, I didn't want to write a survey book. I didn't want to include, there are many more. I would have liked to have one from Africa. And particularly, as I said, I would have liked to have one from Iran. Iranian women, as again, to go back to Professor Milani's question, there are certain periods in Iranian histories where they have been tremendously powerful, tremendously influential and active in politics, but not necessarily, again, as the one who wears the crown. The Ilkhanian in Iran, you know, in the 13th and 14th century became very powerful, and women in that, from that background maintained huge power. There is a queen called Abish Khatun, which I was hoping to find more information on her. She became actually a ruler in Shiraz, but very young, but she got caught in some kind of subversive activities, apparently, and she was eventually jailed and killed when she was only 26 years old. So there is something about her, but I could not find enough information here in the US, and I was not able to go back to Iran and do that. So one of these days, I'm hoping to find more about her. But of course, we've had other queens throughout history who were queen consorts, not necessarily queen on their own rights. So that's why I couldn't have much on Iran.
Thank you. I want to ask two more questions, which might take us 1 or 2 minutes over. But the first one is, how did the writing of this book change your views on the increasingly significant and topical issue of women in power in the world, and particularly in Iran?
Significantly. It affected me significantly. But as I said, the impetus was, well, as I mentioned in my book, I, as a young kid, um, was taken to some political demonstrations by my father, who was a member of the National Front, Jabhe Milli, but also my extended family, my paternal, extended family. There are very many women who are quite powerful, who have their PhDs, who have traveled to Europe. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, the wife of an Ayatollah, was very powerful in our midst. And I have to tell you that she was the only wife of my grandfather, so he never married other women. So these, things like that are accumulative, and at some point in your life, they sort of gel and then they become to fruition. So for me, it was a long process in personally and also intellectually. As I mentioned, I met these women who nominated themselves for presidential election in Iran. I met very powerful women in Pakistan. I was quite impressed by Benazir Bhutto. I happened to be in Pakistan when she was first elected, and I had never seen anything like it, like the number of men dancing in front of her motorcade, the amount of red roses thrown on her path. And she couldn't even, the motorcade couldn't even move. It was just incredible. I mean, there was the envy of, 1,000 politicians. So all these gradually built up. And again, Hillary Clinton here, Mrs. Hillary Clinton, becoming a nominee for her political party. So all that contributed to finally, gelling the idea. Although I had the idea, I made my proposal before Hillary Clinton became the nominee of her party. But all of that are important. And again, going to Iran and meeting a lot of interesting women, a lot of active women, a lot of, awfully engaged women in Iran, then I thought, excuse me, that would be a good time to write about that topic. And as I said, I also wanted to be something more cross-cultural, not just limited to a particular country, as much as I would have liked to write something about my own country.
Thank you. Okay, last question. How hopeful or optimistic are you that the Iranian women's movement will be able to advance its goals?
I wish I had the crystal ball, but given what has happened, like trying to divine the future based on what has happened in the past, I am pretty hopeful. But by the same token, I think the push to the backlash to push them back is also going to be fierce. What is good is to see that many men, young men, older men, fathers, brothers, are becoming aware of the tremendous injustices that has gone on to women, and they're supportive of their daughters, wives, children, mothers, all that. So I am hoping that with these women making common cause with some political elites, maybe even some reformist, open-minded religious elites. Let me tell you, my grandfather, who was an Ayatollah, was very open-minded. We never veiled before him. Many of my cousins or my aunts went to Europe. They were educated in Europe at the time when not very many women did so. So there are open-minded, educated Ayatollahs who are supportive of their daughters' educations, their daughters' ambitions. So I'm hoping that there is a common ground made by women, men, political elite for the betterment of the country. Because when we have a good constitution, when we have good laws, the society flourishes even more than it has had. I mean, there's something really vital about the Iranian society. I mean, there's the vitality, the creativity that we have seen it even in this past 40 years, the films, the plays, the musics, all that, you name it, this paintings, visuals. It's just incredible what people have done despite the restrictions that was placed on them by the state. Nonetheless, I think there is hope for that. And I am hopeful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haeri. I want to pass along comments from many of our viewers who are thanking you for your work and for a wonderful talk. And I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but thank you to everyone who stayed on a few minutes late. And again, Dr. Haeri, thank you for a wonderful talk. And hopefully we can host you at Stanford in person.
I hope so too. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Milani. Thank you, Franco. Thank you, Ms. Parhad. I really enjoyed these conversations. I look forward to continuing that.
Thank you. Us as well.
Thank you.
Bye.